So this happened during spring break. It was one of my few years in college before dropping out, and we were just young and trying to have some fun before all the troubles of adulthood caught up with us. A group of us rented a small cabin near a lake instead of going to the beach. The idea was basically just to hang out, grill, drink a little, and avoid the huge crowds that usually come with spring break spots. There were 5 of us total. Me, my friend Aaron, my girlfriend at the time, and 2 other friends from our campus apartment building. We weren't doing anything crazy. Honestly, the trip was pretty relaxed compared to most spring break stories. The cabin itself was part of a small group of rentals around the lake. Nothing fancy, just basic places people use for fishing weekends or short vacations. The reason I remember the layout pretty well is because what happened later depended a lot on where everything was. The cabin sat maybe 30 or 40 yards from the water. There was a gravel driveway, a small porch, and a dirt path that led down toward the dock. Behind the cabin was a wooded area that stretched pretty far back. No houses directly behind us, just trees. Inside the cabin there was one big open living room and kitchen area, and then 2 bedrooms down a short hallway. The front door opened directly into the living room. From the couch, you could see the door, the kitchen, and the hallway all at once. The first couple days were normal. We grilled, hung out by the water, and took the little rowboat out a few times. On the 3rd night, we decided to sit outside near the water for a while because the weather was actually really nice. Cool, but not cold. We had a small, portable speaker playing music quietly, and were just talking. At some point, Aaron said he forgot his phone inside and walked back up to the cabin. That's when the whole thing started. He came back down the path maybe a minute later, but he was moving faster than before. Not running exactly, but definitely not relaxed. He asked if anyone had gone back inside. No one had moved but him. He looked toward the cabin again and said he thought someone was walking around in there. At first, we all assumed he probably just heard the TV or something shifting in the house. Old cabins make noise all the time, but he shook his head and said he saw a shadow move past the kitchen window when he walked up. And the weird part was the cabin lights were off. We had left them off when we came outside. So if someone was moving inside, they were doing it in the dark. We all walked back toward the cabin together. I remember thinking there had to be some normal explanation. Maybe someone from the rental company checking something. When we got closer, the front door was slightly open. Only a couple inches, but enough that you could see it wasn't fully closed. I know for a fact we shut it earlier because I was the last one who came outside. Aaron pushed the door open slowly and flipped on the living room light. The place looked normal at first glance. Nothing knocked over, nothing obviously missing. But one thing stood out immediately. The kitchen drawers were open. Not all of them, just 2. And one of them was the drawer where the knives were kept. We all just kind of stood there looking around. Then Aaron said something that made my stomach drop a little. The back door. It was open. The cabin had a small back entrance that led toward the trees behind the house, and it was wide open. None of us had used that door the entire trip. At that point, things got tense pretty fast. Aaron walked over and closed the back door, while the rest of us checked the bedrooms and bathroom. Nobody inside. But the woods behind the cabin were completely dark, and the weirdest part was the kitchen counter. One of the larger kitchen knives was missing. We didn't notice that right away until my girlfriend pointed it out. The empty slot in the knife block was obvious once you looked for it. So now we knew someone had been inside the cabin while we were sitting down by the water. They opened drawers, they grabbed a knife, and they left through the back door into the woods. Which meant when Aaron first walked up to the cabin, that person might have still been inside, or just stepping out the back. We locked every door immediately and called the property number listed on the fridge. They told us to call the sheriff's office. 2 deputies showed up maybe 30 or 40 minutes later. They checked the cabin, walked the area behind the house with flashlights, and asked us a bunch of questions about when we had last been inside. They didn't find the knife or anyone in the woods. But one of them pointed something out in the dirt near the back door. Fresh shoe prints leading away from the cabin toward the tree line. The deputies said break-ins like that sometimes happen when people think vacation cabins are empty. What stuck with me, though, was the timing. If Aaron hadn't gone back for his phone when he did, whoever was inside probably would have had more time in the cabin. And we were planning to go back inside soon anyway. 5 people walking into a dark cabin while someone was still in there with a kitchen knife? That's the part I try not to think about too much. We finished the trip, but none of us sat outside at night after that. This happened during spring break when I was a junior in high school, and it's one of those stories I still bring up sometimes when people talk about how simple those trips are supposed to be. Most of the time, it really was just a normal beach trip with friends. We spent most of the week doing exactly what you'd expect: swimming, walking around the boardwalk, staying up late talking about random stuff. But there was one afternoon that changed the whole mood of the trip pretty quickly. Nothing ended up happening directly to us, but it became clear afterward that we had wandered into a situation that could have turned bad if we hadn't left when we did. At the time I was 16, almost 17, and this was the first spring break trip I'd ever taken without my parents. A group of 5 of us had gone down to the coast with one of my friend's older cousins who was 21 and technically the responsible adult for the trip. Our parents all knew about it and had agreed to it ahead of time. The plan was pretty simple. Stay at a small beach hotel, spend the days at the water, and mostly stick to the busy tourist areas where there were always people around. The group was me, my friend Lucas, another guy from our school named Trevor, and 2 girls we'd known since middle school. Lucas's cousin Jake was the one driving and had booked the hotel. We weren't the kind of group that was trying to throw huge parties or anything. Most of us were just excited to be somewhere warm with no school for a week. For the first few days, the trip honestly went exactly the way we hoped it would. The beach town we stayed in had a long strip of public beach, with a boardwalk running along part of it. During the day, the area near the boardwalk was crowded with families, tourists, and people renting chairs and umbrellas. But if you walked far enough down the shoreline, away from the main entrances, the beach got quieter, and the houses started replacing the big hotels. On the 4th day of the trip, we decided to walk along the water in that direction, because the main area had gotten pretty packed with spring break crowds. We started out near the public access point by the boardwalk and just followed the shoreline south. It took maybe 20 minutes before the big hotels started disappearing behind us. The section we ended up in had a mix of vacation houses and small rental cottages set back behind the dunes. There were still people on the beach here and there, but the groups were spread out much farther apart. It felt quieter, which honestly was part of the reason we liked it at first. Eventually, we came across a stretch of beach where there wasn't anyone else nearby at all. Right in the middle of that quiet section was one of those wooden dune walkways that led up to a deck overlooking the beach. At the top of the deck were 2 folding chairs and a couple large coolers sitting next to them. From a distance, it looked exactly like the kind of setup people leave behind when they run inside a beach house for a minute. But as we got closer, the scene started to feel strange in a way that was hard to explain at first. The chairs were facing the water like someone had been sitting there recently. There was even a towel over the back of them. One of the coolers was sitting open. As we passed through the scene, it was obvious there were no drinks inside the coolers, just several thick plastic bags stacked on top of one another. Even before anyone said anything, I'm sure we all were thinking the same thing. Then Lucas mentioned how rotten it smelled around the coolers. Once he mentioned it, it was kind of hard to ignore. It wasn't the kind of smell you'd expect from food sitting in a cooler in the sun. It was heavier than that, and it had that sour, metallic edge that immediately makes your brain register that something isn't right. Trevor walked partway up the wooden path toward the deck to get a better look. He didn't go all the way up, but just enough to see inside the coolers. We all waited for him to get back, and when he turned around, his expression had changed completely. What he saw was the worst-case scenario. There were even more coolers behind the chairs, all full of these bags. Then it kind of became obvious what the smell was. While we were trying to process what he had seen, Lucas glanced down the beach and noticed 2 men walking toward us from farther along the shoreline. They were coming from the direction of one of the houses, maybe 100 yards away. Neither of them looked like someone out for a casual walk along the beach. They were both wearing jeans and dark shirts instead of swim clothes. What stood out even more was the way they were looking directly at our group, It wasn't just casual glances over, the way people usually do on a beach, but clearly watching us. One of them said something to the other while pointing slightly toward the deck behind us. I couldn't tell exactly what he said over the waves, but the tone made it obvious they were talking about us standing there. Trevor quietly suggested that we should probably keep moving and not give them a reason to think we were paying attention to the deck area. Nobody argued with that idea, and we started walking down the shoreline again at a steady pace, trying to act like we were just continuing our beach walk. As we moved farther away, Lucas glanced back and saw one of the men climb up the dune toward the deck, while the other stayed on the sand, watching our group. Once we were a good distance away, the tension that had been building finally came out all at once. Everyone started talking at the same time about the smell and the bags Trevor had seen in the cooler. The farther we walked, the more the whole situation started to feel worse. When we eventually reached another public beach access path that led back toward the busier part of town near the boardwalk, we found one of the lifeguards and told him about the whole thing. Later that evening, we were walking along the boardwalk when we noticed 2 police vehicles parked near one of the beach access points farther down the shoreline. I can't say for certain that it was connected to what we reported earlier, but the location lined up almost exactly with the stretch of beach we had been walking through. I never learned what was actually inside those coolers, but the smell coming from them and the way those 2 men reacted when they saw us standing near that deck made it clear we had walked into something we were never meant to see. So this happened a couple springs ago when I was doing food delivery on the side. I've told this story a few times and people usually think I'm exaggerating, but honestly it was one of those situations where everything felt normal at first and then suddenly it very clearly wasn't. Nothing technically happened to me, but I'm pretty sure I walked right up to something bad without realizing it. At the time I was in my early 20s and working a regular office job during the day. To make extra money, I delivered for one of those food delivery apps in the evenings. I actually liked doing it. It was easy money and usually pretty relaxed. Most nights it was just driving around town, dropping off takeout and listening to podcasts. Spring was usually busy because the weather was nice and people didn't feel like cooking. So I was doing a lot of deliveries after work that time of year. I'd already done a bunch that night without anything unusual happening. Just normal houses, normal apartment complexes, nothing memorable. Then I got one order that was a little different. The order was for a pretty large amount of food from a barbecue place, like enough for several people. The delivery address was a small rental house on the edge of town. Not out in the middle of nowhere, but definitely quieter than the neighborhoods I had been delivering in earlier. When I pulled up, the first thing I noticed was that the house looked dark. No lights in the windows, no porch light, nothing. That happens all the time though. People forget to turn lights on when they order food, or just don't know proper manners when it comes to ordering. The driveway was empty though. I assumed maybe some kids ordered it, or maybe they were parked in the garage. I grabbed the bag and walked up to the front door. The instructions in the app said, "Hand it to me," so I knocked. No one answered. I knocked again and waited. Still nothing. While I was standing there, I noticed the front door was slightly opened. That's always weird, but again, if you deliver enough, you know it's not unheard of. At first, I thought maybe someone had opened it and then stepped away for a second. So I knocked again and said something like, "Delivery." That's when I heard a noise inside. Not talking exactly, more like a moan of some kind, and then something being moved quickly, like a chair scraping across the floor. Then everything went quiet again. The door stayed slightly open. I stood there for another few seconds, thinking someone would come grab the food, but nobody did. At that point, I started to feel like something was off. Normally, if people know food is arriving, they come to the door pretty quickly, so I pulled out my phone to check the address. The name on the delivery was just a first name. Nothing unusual there, but I noticed something else. The delivery instructions had been edited about a minute before I arrived. Now it said, "Just leave it outside." While I was standing there looking at my phone, the door creaked open just a little further. Just enough that I could see into the living room. The lights were off inside, but there was enough light from outside that I could see part of the room. Furniture was pushed around, like someone had moved things quickly. There was something on the floor near the couch. At first, I thought it was a pile of clothes or something. Then I realized it was a person. Someone was just lying on the floor, unconscious or worse. My heart skipped a beat when I noticed the situation. My brain kind of froze for a second. I didn't know if the person was hurt, asleep, or what. But then I heard movement deeper in the house. Not coming toward the door, but walking in another room and opening or closing doors. My curiosity nearly got the better of me, but that's when I suddenly felt very aware that I was standing in a dark doorway of a house where at least one person was on the floor and someone else was moving around inside. I set the food down on the porch, stepped back, and walked quickly down the driveway. I didn't run, but I definitely didn't take my time either. Once I got to my car, I locked the doors immediately. I couldn't have got on my phone quicker to call the police. While I was speaking to the operator, I saw someone looking through a window of the house at me, and so I drove down the street a few houses so it looked like I was leaving. I explained the situation and gave them the address, and a patrol car showed up maybe 10 minutes later while I was still parked down the street. 2 officers went inside the house. They stayed there for a while, but eventually one of them came back out and walked over to my car to ask a few questions about what I saw. He didn't give me many details, but he did confirm something important. The person on the floor was alive, but they had been severely injured, and for some reason was chained to the floor right there in the living room. The officer also said something that stuck with me. Apparently the food had been placed, but it wasn't on the victim's phone, which meant whoever edited the delivery instructions while I was outside probably wasn't the person who ordered the food. I don't know if they ever found out who was responsible for everything, but my own theory is that someone who knew the victim had been there and was responsible for whatever was happening. Somehow along the way, I guess for help, they ordered food, and that's when I showed up. I've heard of stuff like that before, but I never would have thought I would be involved in something like that.